Cemetery Boys is about a transgender boy named Gadriel who is Latinx, and he lives in this Brujex community, which is kind of like a community of like witches and wizards, you could say. And he has been denied the rites of passage ceremony because his family doesn't think that he can go through the brujo or the boy rites of passage because he was assigned female at birth. So he decides to go do the ceremony on his own, and then he figures out the best way to like really prove himself to his community and especially to his family is to summon the spirit of his cousin who recently just died under mysterious circumstances. But he accidentally summons the spirit of Julian Diaz, who is like the resident bad boy of his high school. And then suddenly their stories and their kind of journey gets really entangled together. And it turns into this really fun, I like to call it a ghost story turned rom-com.
I love that description. Where
Yeah.
did the idea for Cemetery Boys come from?
I follow a bunch of writing prompt blogs on Tumblr. So I was actually, I know it's so funny. I was scrolling through Tumblr like in the middle of the night one night, and I found this writing prompt, and it was a whole sentence long, and it said, "What would you do if you summoned a ghost and then you couldn't get rid of it?" And a lot of the like replies and like reblogs were like, "Oh, here's these like really like scary and like spooky ghost story ideas." And like I was like, okay, what if I summoned a ghost that I couldn't get rid of? And then what if he was really cute? And so like that's where the story for Cemetery Boys kind of sparked from. And then knowing that I wanted to write about a Latinx boy and ghosts, it just aligned perfectly with my favorite holiday, which is Dia de Muertos.
That was not what I was expecting at all for the inspiration, but I love that so much. You've mentioned it a little bit, but Cemetery Boys kind of weaves a whole lot of themes together. You've got the Latinx community, Dias de los Muertos in particular, and then gender identity issues too. How important was it to you to have all those sort of representations in your novel?
It was really important to me to have all of those kind of facets because intersectionality and like different marginalizations when you're a person who has like so many that you're kind of grappling with, those intersections aren't always explored. And so when you're someone who you're like, okay, I'm trans, I'm Latinx, and I'm queer, it's really hard to find representation of yourself in media. And I used to get this question all the time when I was doing interviews. They were like, oh, well, Aiden, when was the first time you saw yourself represented in media? And like for a while, I was like, okay, I need to come up with some kind of fake answer. Like, where's a book where there was like a piece of my identity that I like related to? But then eventually I was just like, well, I never saw myself represented in media. Like, according to books and TV shows and movies, people like me didn't exist. And that was why I wrote Cemetery Boys. And so to have that on the page and to have that representation is so important. And to hear from readers being like, this is the first time I ever saw myself in a book. That's huge, especially for young adult readers.
Have you gotten a lot of feedback from readers, especially young adults?
It's really wonderful because I get a lot of like DMs on Instagram, but I don't really check my DMs. But every once in a while, I'll kind of scroll through, and there's young readers being like, "Yeah, this is the first time I ever saw someone like me in a book," or like, I've had quite a few folks who have been like, "I was able to like discover and unpack my own gender identity because of this book." And I've even had one person who decided to name themselves after Julian. So that was, yeah, stuff like that. It's just, it blows my mind. And I'm always so ill-equipped to like respond because I'm just like, I am so overwhelmed and grateful for this. And I don't know how to put that into words. It's amazing, really.
So when did you find out that you won a 2021 Pacific Northwest Book Award, and what went through your mind?
I found out, I want to say like a couple of weeks before they announced it. It was like 1 or 2 weeks. And my editor had emailed me, and I was like, I was shocked. Like every time anything exciting happens with like publishing, especially Cemetery Boys, I am like so thankful and excited. And like none of it has because like, I haven't become jaded with the process like at all. Anytime any of these things happen, it's just like, it's life changing and it's incredible. So I totally like freaked out and to like texted all my friends. I was like, and I was like, I can't talk about it, but like I have to tell someone or I will just explode.
And your next book, Lost in the Neverwoods, comes out in March of this year. And it takes place in a city that many of our viewers and readers are probably familiar with, right?
Yeah, so Lost in the Neverwoods comes out on March 23rd, and it takes place in Astoria, Oregon, which is a city that I madly fell in love with when I was here for school for that 1 year. I had a friend who lived in Astoria, and so she brought me up there for the weekend, and I just fell madly in love with it. It's such a beautiful place with such like wonderful people that I was like, okay, I need to set this book here. It's a dark reimagining of Peter Pan. So it takes place after the original story and obviously like contemporarily set and takes place in Astoria, Oregon. And basically what happens is that when Wendy was younger, she and her brothers went missing in the woods behind her house. 6 months later, she was found, but her brothers were never found. And so it picks up on her 18th birthday, and kids are starting to go missing in Astoria, and people are kind of like looking at Wendy being like, is this have something to do with what happened to her and her brothers? And then all of a sudden Peter shows up claiming to know that he knows what happened to the missing kids and where her brothers are and how to get them back. And then the mystery kind of unfolds from there.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It sounds so spooky.
Yeah, it's very spooky and atmospheric. It's a really fun book.
So is this the first one that you wrote then?
Yes. So Lost in the Neverwoods is the first book that I ever wrote, and it's the first book that I sold.
What was the process like? I mean, because you mentioned that you've always sort of been a writer and like a creative type, but how difficult was it to turn that into a novel?
Pretty difficult. I got my MFA in creative writing at Mills College, and so Lost in the Neverwoods was my thesis. And so it was like I really needed to like have those like deadlines of being like, you actually have to write this whole thing completely in order to really like be motivated enough to complete a book. So it was like a 2.5 year long process of actually writing it. And then after that, I edited it on my own for a couple of years. I sent it out to like a handful of agents without like getting any bites. And then I heard about Swoon Reads, which is my publisher for Cemetery Boys and Lost in the Neverwoods, and they take unsolicited manuscripts. So that meaning that like a writer could send in their manuscript without needing an agent. So I did that just like on a total whim. I didn't think that anything would come from it. And then I want to say like a couple months later, my now editor, Holly West, emailed me. I was like, hey, we'd love to like jump on a call and talk to you about Lost in the Neverwoods. So that's how that came to be. And it was, I was in a meeting when I got that email, and I was sitting next to my friend, and I was like, oh my God, read this. So I'm like in this like huge meeting, like on VC, trying to like not be like losing my mind in the middle of it.
Why, if that was the first one you sold, did Cemetery Boys come out first?
So since Lost in the Woods was the first book that I sold, and there's this thing called an option clause. And what that means is like when you sell a book, there's usually an option clause that says that your editor and that publisher gets a first look at whatever your next book is going to be, so that they could potentially be able to publish it first. After Lost in the Neverwoods went off to copy edits, I started like poking my editor, and I was like, hey, when can I start sending you ideas for like my next book? And she was like, oh, like, if you want to send them over, go ahead. So I wrote up, I sent her like 5 ideas. And like the first one I had written like 20,000 words of, and like the next one had like a full synopsis and everything. And they kind of got like weaker and weaker, like as the list went down. And Cemetery Boys was the very last idea that I pitched. It was a paragraph long, and most of the sentences ended in question marks. So I was like, well, maybe he's trans, and like maybe he's Latinx, and like maybe also queer. Because at that time I thought that I wasn't allowed to write book with a character like me. That I thought, like, according to the market, that it wasn't something that was like sellable. So I was like really nervous, and I was like asking permission basically of my editor to be like, could I write this book? And when she emailed me back, she was like, yeah, Cemetery Boys, that's the one that we want. And I was like, really? I was totally shocked. So I wrote the first draft and sent it to my editor. And then she called me and she was like, the team kind of feels like this should be your debut novel because this feels very you. And I was like, I would love for it to be my debut novel. So that's why it came out first. We just flopped the releases.